Revenants are an interesting class to play around because unlike other classes where they have longer individual cooldowns, Revenants have shorter individual cooldowns and then a shared resource that all of their skills will use. So their weapon skills and their utility skills will all use that energy, and a very good Revenant will know how to manage that resource to get the most powerful skill, and they can also pool energy and get out really large combos in a short window of time to give them really huge power spikes. Also, whenever they legend swap, they will gain all of their energy back to 50% again. So if they use a lot of their energy and they get very low on it and then legend swap, then they've got energy to use skills again. So they have these power spikes, and legend swapping has a 9-second cooldown. So you know every basically 9 seconds they're going to have these spikes of damage, and you can see that by the legend swap. The legend swap utilities are going to be a predetermined set of skills. There are corresponding trait lines that synergize very well with certain stances. And while yes, you can have different trait lines that don't correspond to those stances, there are general synergies. So for example, the Devastation trait line works very well with the Assassin's Hero stance. So the Assassin stance gives you a lot of damage. So Enchanted Daggers will give you a buff, and whenever you deal damage or hit something, you will consume one of those daggers and it'll do damage and it will heal you. So when you see this buff on them, you basically know you want to avoid their next several attacks because it will consume those charges even if they don't proc. And then they have Riposting Shadows. This is their stun break. So one thing that's important is you know that every stance has one stun break on it. So for the Assassin stance, that's Riposting Shadows, it's pretty expensive. It's 40 energy. But it gives them an extra dodge, and it gives them Condi Cleanse, and it's a stun break. So it's pretty powerful, but you do know that they're out of energy if they've used this pretty much. So you want to throw your CC on them after they use this. And then they have Phase Traversal. This is a very strong port skill. It gives them unblockable and quickness, and allows them to do a lot of skill combos in a short window of time. You want to basically, when you see this, like a Revenant that's using Shiro stance coming towards you, you want to get to a no valid path, and that way they can't port to you. It is a very targeted port as well, so if you line of sight and they can't target you, then that's also pretty good at it. And they have Jade Winds, which is a very wide AoE, large animation, but it has a very long 3-second stun. So basically, the Devastation trait line is just lifesteal and vulnerability. So the longer they stick to their targets, the more advantages they get. Then you have the Dwarf stance. This works very well with the Retribution trait line, and Retribution will give them a little bit more dodges with Vigor, and when you have Vigor, you will take reduced damage, so it's really good trait line for reducing damage taken, and gives them a lot of sustain, and gives them also a lot of weakness. So whenever they disable a foe, they will give weakness, and they will also have a dome whenever they use their heal skill, which will block projectiles and will weaken nearby foes. So this is a very strong trait because that dome will counter power damage and it will counter range projectiles. Dwarf stance does have 5 condition cleanse on the heal skill, but that's generally it. So the heal skill for Jalis is kind of nice for pretty much doing everything actually. It does cleanse conditions, it counters power with the weakness, and then it blocks projectiles. So yeah, it's a pretty good heal if you have the Dome of the Mist trait. Then you have Inspiring Reinforcements. This is a really nice stability pulsing road, and it will also give weakness if the initial hit touches you. And basically, Dwarf Revenants don't have a really good stun break because it's on their elite skill. and because of that they generally don't like to use it because it's so costly, and for the cast time it's kind of clunky. So generally they like to just use inspiring reinforcements to preemptively prevent CCs. So if you really want to CC a Revenant, you should get them out of their inspiring reinforcement and then try to CC them. And you also have to watch out for the taunt. The forced engagement is a very strong taunt because it can set up a lot of damage, because taunt is essentially like a stun. And then you have Vengeful Hammers, which is a very strong ability because anyone in melee range who tries to trade with them usually loses, because these hammers do a lot of damage and they give them damage reduction and healing. So basically if they have the hammers up, you don't want to be in melee range of them. Then you have the Demon stance, or the Malix stance, which is very much based on conditions and countering conditions. So the corruption trait line corresponds to Malix, and a lot of the traits in there will buff up your demon stance skills. So you gain resistance whenever you use a demon stance. So yeah, they're gonna pretty much avoid a lot of conditions by their resistance uptime, and they have chill giving them torment. So their chills will do damage now, so they can feel very debilitating and kill you at the same time. And then they have choices between getting more resistance or having condition transfer whenever they swap their legends, or they can do more damage whenever they swap legends. So a corruption or Malix Revenant is actually very scary in the demon stance, but they're also scary when they just legend swap in general, because they have Invoke Torment, which is on any stance, and they just swap stance. They'll do this Invoke Torment thing, which is this very large animation, and it'll do conditions. So you want to avoid when they legend swap, basically. And it's a pretty good timing to avoid them when they legend swap as well, because that's generally when they're going to get a lot of their energy back, and then they're going to be able to spam out more skills. So the heal skill that Malix Revenants get is the Empowering Misery, which will give them more healing per condition that they have on them, which is really good for usage with Pain Absorption, which will absorb conditions from nearby allies and give them resistance for each condition that they absorb. And it's also their stun break on the Malix weapon set. Then you have Banish Enchantment, which is a pretty long range, unblockable, and piercing boon corruption. It removes 3 boons. Sorry, it's not a corruption, it's a boon removal. And it removes 3 boons, gives a lot of chill, and if you have the chill to torment trait, it'll give torment. So this is a pretty good skill, because if you're going against like guardians or engineers, they have a lot of boons, and removing those boons is pretty valuable, but you also get chill and torment on top of that. So if you're like a boon heavy class versus a Condi Revenant, you're going to be struggling pretty hard. Then they have Call to Anguish. This is their leap skill, gives them a lot of mobility and pulls enemies into the area, which allows them to do a lot of combos. So if you see them leap, you want to immediately dodge, because then you're going to get CC'd, and usually they're going to be pulsing out AoEs, because their elite skill, Embrace the Darkness, just basically pulses AoE torment around them and gives more the more skills they're using. So combined with the Call to Anguish, you can put a lot of torment on people. Just being near a Revenant in the Malix stance is kind of dangerous. Then you have the Ventari stance. This one isn't too much counterplay to it. It's basically a healer spec, and you can't really interact with their tablet. You just know that there is one animation that you need to dodge, and that is the Energy Expulsion. So whenever it does this animation, it will knock back all foes. So when you see that animation, you want to basically dodge so that you don't get knocked back. And there is the Salvation trait line, which will blind nearby foes whenever they use their heal skill. So you're going to get blinded a lot when you're near a Ventari Revenant, and there's just a lot of tankiness and healing synergy pretty much. So if you're playing against a Ventari Rev, you just want to dodge that, and after you get blinded, there's going to be, well, let's see what the cooldown is. So there's like a 3-second cooldown between their blinds, because they can just keep spamming blind on you like this with that traded. So they can keep blinding you quite a bit with the Ventari's Will. So yeah, you're gonna get blinded a lot. Then you have the Herald Elite Specialization, which gives you access to the Facet of Nature as one of your new abilities, and the Dragon Stance will give you access to other facets. So how a facet works is you cast it, there's the facet, and then you are draining your energy as you have them activating, and then you consume them for a sort of skill effect, and then you'll gain your energy regeneration back. The Facet of Nature, the F2, is very strong when combined with either the Demon Stance or the Assassin Stance, because in Assassin Stance it gives a high damage unblockable boon removal that looks kind of like this, and in the Demon Stance it has the same sort of animation, but it will, instead of doing damage and boon rip, it will instead give a condition transfer and give them might. So both are very dangerous, and they're on a 20-second cooldown. So they can use these pretty much every time they swap into that specific stance. And the reason why you have to understand that is because basically they don't want to use it while in Dragon Stance because it has a very low effect. So most Heralds will run the Dragon Stance, and then they'll run like either Shiro if they're power, and then they'll run Malix if they're condition. So they'll generally use the Facet of Nature while they're in Shiro or Malix correspondingly. The Dragon Stance does give very powerful facets as their utilities though. The Facet of Light is very strong because once they use the effect of Infused Light, they basically convert all damage, power, and condition into healing. So it's very good for Revenants to play very aggressively. So they can tank a bunch of conditions and then just ignore cleansing them and then heal retroactively on conditions that have been stacked up on them. Or if they see a big attack is coming at them, they can use Infused Light and not only negate all the damage, but heal up from it. So what you want to do is, first of all, if you see a Revenant is in the Glint stance and it has been 30 seconds since their last Infused Light, you don't want to be stacking up conditions on them, because then they can just heal off of them. Especially if you see that they've used the cast time and that Facet of Light is ready to be used into Infused Light. So you can prevent them from using Infused Light by CCing them before they can use the Facet, but most good Revenants will preemptively put a Facet of Light when they see themselves going into a dangerous situation. So what you want to do is, when you see Facet of Light, is you want to put as much power damage on them as possible, because if you put too much conditions, then they'll just convert that into healing. You want to power damage spike them until you see the Facet of Light come out, and then you want to immediately stop. And for this reason, you don't want to be using pulsing or like AoEs that they can control and like basically walk through themselves and create damage to themselves to heal. So anything like traps or like pulsing AoEs, you don't want to use that when you're playing around Infused Light. You want to do quick, short burst damage to bait out their Infused Light, stop the damage, wait for 3 seconds, and then continue putting on conditions or pressure. Then they have Facet of Darkness. This is their stun break. The first one that you saw there was not an effect, that just is the pulsing fury. But then the second one is the stun break, which also gives blind and reveal enemies. This is actually a very aggressive and defensive skill at the same time, because it's a stun break with a blind, but it's also aggressive because if you push that onto someone while you're attacking them, you can basically do a no animation blind and prevent them from counterattacking you. The thing about that though is, if they do use it aggressively in that way, then they have no stun break. So if you see a Revenant using their Facet of Darkness aggressively, then you know that they have no stun break. So generally you'll want to put a lot of CCs on a Revenant when you see that they don't have their stun break, because each legend stance only has one stun break. The Facet actives are 0 cost. So only upkeeping the boons will cost energy, which means that heralds have a lot more energy to use while in the dragon stance, which means they can use more of their weapon skills and generally just get skills for free. So they are actually the most powerful when they are in the dragon stance and the hardest to kill because of Facet of Light. So you really want to wait until a Revenant leaves the dragon stance, and then they are the most vulnerable to being focused. Then you have the Facet of Chaos, which when you use the Consume effect will create a large dragon animation, and that can actually be stowed, so you don't want to get hit by it, but they can also you can't really tell whether or not they're gonna stow it or not. But if you get hit by it, it will knock you back, and that can be pretty dangerous. And they can also change the direction that it's facing, so even if they're not facing you when they're using it, they can change direction very fast. So generally when you see the dragon coming out, you just want to play around it. You don't want to assume that they're not going to hit you with it. Then you have the Renegade Elite Specialization, which allows the usage of the Kala Renegade stance. So the Renegade allows you an F2, F3, and F4. Can't really play around these, but you can play around the spirits that they summon. So the heal skill is a buff that gives them 50% less condition damage. So if they are having this buff on them, you don't want to be putting conditions on them. So one of their spirits does a lot of daze, and one of their spirits does a lot of damage. You can see the difference by the blue one doing damage and the orange one that spins around doing the CCs. But these are kind of hard to see because they usually stack them on top of each other, so you generally just don't want to stand in them. You can, however, CC the spirits, and when the spirits get CC'd, they will stop doing what they're doing, and they will, after the CC, resume doing what they're doing, but then the spirit's probably going to run out by then. So CCing them is usually pretty good, but you're going to need like an AoE CC. And if they have stability, which they can give to the spirits using the Inspiring Reinforcement, well, then you can't really do anything about that. The final trait line that Revenants use, but doesn't really correspond to any single legend stance, is Invocation. And this is just going to give them a bunch of on-legend swap effects, so it's pretty good with every legend stance. And you pretty much just want to know that most Revenants have a massive power spike whenever they use their legend swap, so you want to be careful around those times. And usually you can see that they use their legend swap because you can see like a hero legend kind of appear above them. So let's go over some of the weapon skills. Power Revenants will use sword usually. You have the Shackling Wave, which is the thing you want to dodge the most. Just dodge that or you'll get immobilized, and then you'll get hit by the next thing. There is the Death Strike, which doesn't really have much of an animation, but if they port on top of you, you basically want to be instantly dodging that. They have their Sword 2, which is just a quick little burst. It does more damage if it only hits one target. And the same thing with Unrelenting Assault. If it's only one target, it will do all of the hits on that single target. But if there's two targets next to each other that I hit, then the Chilling Isolation will do less damage to each of them, and the Unrelenting Assault will port around to multiple targets, so it'll split the damage more. And Revenants really like to focus single targets. So to counter a Power Revenant, what you want to do is stand next to your teammates so that all of their sword main hand abilities will either spread the damage or will not basically focus you as hard. Then you have the Staff. The 3 skill is Warding Rift, which will give a block and then a blind in front of them. So if you get your attacks blocked and then blinded, that's basically 2 animations that they're getting. So you really don't want to be next to them when they're using their block, because then your next attack is going to be blinded as well. Then they have their Renewing Wave. You see them using that, you probably want to interrupt it because it's a lot of healing and condition cleanse. And then they have Surge of the Mists, which is kind of like a combo enabler, and a disengage ability. It just kind of like winds up and then it does this like very heavy CC follow through kind of thing. Basically, when you see a Revenant is in staff, you'll see that they pretty much immediately block, and then they'll do some like attacks, and then when they're in danger, they will use Surge of the Mist. So when they use Surge of the Mist, you kind of want to be like to the side or behind them, and then once you see this animation, you'll want to like move to the side further or behind them. So yeah, just kind of like run around a staff rev, and also you can kind of see that they're about to use their Surge of the Mist because they'll line it up. Like they'll usually do like a back pedal and then they'll go into the Surge of the Mist. So you can kind of know when a Surge of the Mist is really happening, and getting CC'd by it is gonna be pretty detrimental to getting the kill on them. If they're using a hammer, you want to avoid these very large but slow animations because they'll do a lot of damage, but generally you can just get up in a power Revenant's face if they're using a hammer, so it's a very vulnerable weapon set. You just want to get up close. The mace is a very powerful condition based weapon, and the main attack you want to avoid is the Echoing Eruption. This will put a lot of damage on you from the Torment, and it will also give you weakness, which will prevent you from counter pressuring them as well. So that's the main attack, and then obviously you don't want to stand in the fire field. Their Temporal Rift you want to avoid because that can set up a lot of their other abilities. If they're using a short bow, you basically just want to dodge when they use the 7-shot ability because that is where most of their damage is, and don't stand in the Spirit Crush because that can actually do a lot of power and condition damage. Also, you do need to watch out for this knockdown. Thieves and Mesmers counter Revenants because they're just as bursty as Revenants, but they get to choose when to fight, and Revenants get taken advantage of because they can't use up all their energy before swapping. Guardians can't really handle the boon rips and sustained pressure that Revenants dish out, even after the Guardian has gone through all of their cooldowns. Warriors struggle with the blinds and consistent damage of Revenants, but they can reliably land a good CC after a Revenant has used their last stun break if they play aggressively and bait out their energy and stun breaks. Rangers can't survive or escape the consistent pressure that Revenants deal, but if they do manage to escape or slip away, they can make it awkward for Revenants to re-engage and sustain while taking pressure from range and the pet. Necromancers can corrupt Revenants of a lot of their juicy boons and can CC them, but the thing is, Revenants really get to free cast on Necromancers because they don't have a lot of evades, and they get a lot of value out of rolling through their cooldown rotations, but it's also a very volatile matchup because the Necromancer can win pretty hard or the Rev can win pretty hard. Revenants constantly gain energy in combat, so you know if they aren't attacking you for quite some time, they're probably either out of energy or they're building up a lot of energy for a quick succession of skills in a short window of time. So you want to watch out for allowing Revenants to just free cast, but you also want to punish them if you think that they're out of energy, and they probably are kiting away if they are. You also want to be careful of those power spikes that they get whenever they legend swap, so they're usually going to have a stun break available to them after they legend swap, so you don't want to be using stuns after they legend swap. You want to be using it after they legend swap and then have used a few skills. And that's pretty much how you kill a Revenant. You don't want to let them get too much value out of their renewable damage. You want to burst them down, CC them, but the timing is very important. And knowing how their energy system works and legend swapping works will help you to do that. So anyways, if you like the video, then give it a like and subscribe. And also check out the other matchups in the playlist below. And I'll see you next time.